All right, jumping right in. Today we're going to be looking at Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber.
Sounds fun.
And, we always get a ton of questions about whether a book is or isn't worth the read.
Definitely, yeah.
And for this one, we've got a ton of reviews and blog posts, even some pretty heated Goodreads discussions.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to take a deep dive into all of those and help you decide if it's something you want to add to your TBR pile.
Awesome.
So to kind of set the stage, this book is about a girl named Evangeline Fox.
Okay.
And Evangeline, she's heartbroken.
Mm-hmm.
And she makes this deal with the Prince of Hearts
Oh.
to stop her true love's wedding.
Okay, getting juicy already.
But the price he asks for is 3 kisses.
Mm-hmm.
And no one really knows what his true intentions are.
3 kisses, that's a lot.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a risky deal.
For sure.
And the reviews are all over the place. Some readers loved it, thought it was magical and whimsical.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
But others felt it was a little simplistic or the plot was confusing.
Yeah.
So we're going to break it all down and try to figure out, is Once Upon a Broken Heart worth your time?
Once Upon a Broken Heart is a very divisive book. I'll say that right off the bat.
Interesting.
It's beautifully written, no doubt about that, and it creates this really captivating fairy tale atmosphere.
Okay, so the writing is good. That's a plus.
Definitely a plus, but the plot can feel a little meandering at times, and Evangeline, well, she can be a bit frustrating.
Okay, frustrating how? Like, is she just a bad character?
Not necessarily a bad character, but she's definitely naive, like really naive.
Give me an example.
Well, for example, she trusts her stepsister, who's clearly manipulative and out for her own gain.
Oh, no, that's never a good sign.
Right, and then she goes and makes this deal with Jax, the Prince of Hearts, who everyone warns her about.
So she doesn't exactly make the best choices.
Not always, no, but I think that's part of what makes her interesting. She's flawed, she makes mistakes, but she's also capable of growth.
Okay, so there's potential for her to learn from her mistakes.
Exactly. Now, one thing that Garber does really well is the world building. The North, where most of the story takes place, is just magical.
Okay, tell me more about the North. What makes it so special?
Well, for starters, it's home to all sorts of magical creatures and beings. There are miniature dragons that bake treats.
Wait, miniature dragons that bake treats?
Yeah, it's adorable. And then there are these things called cursed stories.
Cursed stories, what are those?
They're stories that have been woven into the fabric of the world, and they have the power to influence people's lives.
Whoa, that's really cool. So it's like the stories themselves are magical.
Exactly. And then there are the fates, these powerful beings who can manipulate destiny.
So kind of like gods.
Kind of, yeah. They're mysterious and a little bit scary, but they add a lot of intrigue to the story.
I can imagine. So we've got beautiful writing, a magical world, and a potentially frustrating but interesting heroine. How does Once Upon a Broken Heart compare to other books in the same genre?
That's a good question. You know, it's been compared to books like Kingdom of the Wicked and The Kinder Poison.
I can kind of see that. All of those have that sort of fairy tale, dark fantasy vibe.
Right. But I think Once Upon a Broken Heart stands out because it's really more about the emotional journey and the consequences of choices.
Interesting. So it's less about plot and more about character development.
In a way, yes. Kingdom of the Wicked leans more towards mystery. The Kinder Poison has a lot of political intrigue.
I see what you mean.
But Once Upon a Broken Heart, it's really about Evangeline figuring out who she is and what she wants.
And maybe learning not to trust every shady character that crosses her path.
Hopefully, yeah.
All right, well, I'm definitely intrigued. But I think we need to dig a little deeper into Evangeline and this whole Prince of Hearts situation.
Let's do it.
So in the next part of our deep dive, we'll be taking a closer look at Evangeline's naivety, her relationship with Jax, and whether this whole 3 kisses deal is as dangerous as it sounds.
Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride. And the consequences of her choices really come into play with, this magical object in the story called the Valory Arch.
The Valory what now?
The Valory Arch. It's this legendary thing, right?
Okay.
Supposed to hold either like amazing treasure or like super dangerous monsters. Nobody's really sure.
Sounds risky.
Oh, it is. And Evangeline ends up with the key to it. Can you believe that?
Oh boy, that doesn't sound good for her, especially with her track record.
Right. And because she's so naive and wants to help everyone, she ends up making choices that have these huge consequences that she never even thought about.
Like, what kind of consequences are we talking about here? Changing the course of kingdoms? Ending the world?
Well, I don't want to give too much away, but let's just say her choices have a ripple effect. It's not just about her anymore.
Intense. So
Mhm.
it's really tying into that whole trust and betrayal thing you were talking about earlier, right?
Totally. Like, Evangeline is constantly trying to figure out who she can actually trust, and those doubts really drive the story forward. Even her relationship with Jax is built on this, foundation of uncertainty. Does he really care about her, or is he just using her?
Ugh, that's the worst. I hate when a book makes you question everything.
Right. But it's also what makes it so good, right? You're constantly trying to figure things out alongside Evangeline.
Okay, I see your point. So we're back to Jax again. He's a fate, right? You mentioned that earlier. Does that like tie into why he's even involved with all of this?
That's the big question. Jax is very secretive, and his true motives, they're kind of revealed slowly as the book goes on. We do get glimpses into his past, though, hints of a tragic backstory.
Ooh, tragic backstory. Always a good hook.
Right. And it might explain why he's so cynical and why he manipulates people, but honestly, even by the end of the book, his true intentions, there's still a bit of a mystery.
So there's a lot of like unresolved stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Which, some readers might find frustrating.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, so we've got beautiful writing, a magical world, a naive heroine, and a mysterious, morally gray love interest. But what about the romance itself? Like, is there any actual romance in this book?
Oh, yeah, there is. But it's definitely a slow burn. Lots of tension and uncertainty. Evangeline and Jax, they're constantly orbiting each other, drawn to each other, but always holding back.
So a lot of longing looks and almost kisses.
Exactly. And it's made even more complicated by the fact that Evangeline, well, she doesn't know if she can trust Jax.
Of course.
She's attracted to him, no doubt, but she's also aware of his darker side. He likes to play games with people.
Speaking of playing games, we have to talk about the vampires.
Ah.
Because I've seen them mentioned in a bunch of reviews, and I'm not going to lie, I'm a little confused. Like, how do vampires even fit into this whole fairy tale world with fates and wishes?
I know, right? It's not your typical fairy tale element.
Not at all.
But they do play a big part in the story, especially when it comes to Jax and his past. Remember that tragic backstory?
Hmm.
The vampires, they're directly connected to that. They add this layer of darkness and complexity, which I think is really cool.
Okay, you've officially piqued my interest. I got to know more about these vampires.
Yeah.
But before we get into spoiler territory, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the plot. You said it was meandering, right?
Yeah, I did. It's not a super fast-paced book.
Oh.
It takes its time to unfold. And Garber spends a lot of time on the world building, like describing the North and its customs and all of its weird magical stuff.
Yeah.
And for some readers, that might feel excessive, like it slows down the plot.
Right. So if you're the type of reader who wants constant action and plot twists, this might not be the book for you.
Exactly. But for me, I actually like the slower pace
Interesting. Why is that?
because I think it allows you to really sink into the world, discover its secrets along with Evangeline and all those details. They add depth and texture. It makes the story feel more real.
So it's more about the journey than the destination.
Yeah, I think so. And Garber, she's really good at writing about the characters' inner thoughts and feelings. So you're not just watching the plot unfold, you're experiencing it through Evangeline's eyes.
Okay, I can appreciate that. It's like you're
Yeah.
really living in the story.
Exactly.
All right, before we move on to our final verdict, I think we need to talk about the emotional experience of reading this book. Like, is it a light and fluffy fairy tale, or is there something more going on?
Well, it definitely has its whimsical moments, but I wouldn't call it light and fluffy. Be prepared for a roller coaster of emotions.
Oh, okay. Like what kind of emotions?
Heartbreak, betrayal, longing, and a lot of uncertainty.
Sounds heavy.
It can be, but there's also a strong sense of hope and resilience, especially when it comes to Evangeline. She's determined to find her happy ending, even when things get really tough.
So it's like a balance of light and dark, happy and sad.
Yeah, I think so. And that's what makes it so compelling. You're rooting for Evangeline to make better choices, you're questioning Jack's motives, and you're just completely swept away by the magic of it all.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the plot, the characters, the world building, even the vampires.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. But now we need to answer the big question. Is Once Upon a Broken Heart worth your time?
And to answer that definitively, we need to talk about the ending.
Ooh, the ending. Always a crucial part of any book.
Exactly. So join us for the final part of this deep dive where we'll discuss the ending, weigh the pros and cons, and deliver our ultimate verdict.
Okay, so we are back and ready to give our final verdict on Once Upon a Broken Heart.
Yes, the moment of truth.
Exactly. We've talked about the world, the characters, even the vampires.
Yeah.
But is it a book you should actually read?
Well, it all comes down to the ending, right?
Yeah.
Like, does it actually give you a satisfying conclusion to Evangeline's journey?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, it's kind of a mixed bag.
Uh-oh. Mixed bag. That doesn't sound too promising. What do you mean?
Well, the ending of Once Upon a Broken Heart is a cliffhanger. And like a really big one.
Ooh, I see where this is going. Not a fan of cliffhangers.
I mean, it depends. Some people love them. But I know a lot of readers are going to be frustrated because a lot of plot lines are left unresolved and you're left with a ton of questions.
Yeah, like what happens next?
Exactly. And, some readers, they really want closure. They want to see Evangeline, like, conquer everything and get her happily ever after.
Right. But this isn't that kind of book.
Not really, no. But I think for other readers, the cliffhanger is actually going to add to the intrigue,
Okay, you're going to have to explain that one to me. How can a cliffhanger be a good thing?
Because it keeps you thinking about the story even after you finished reading it. It sparks all these theories and discussions, and you just, like, desperately want to know what happens next.
So it's like the story continues even after you close the book.
Exactly. The cliffhanger becomes part of the whole experience.
Okay, I can see that. But I gotta ask, this is the first book in a series, right?
Yeah.
So aren't all those unanswered questions going to be addressed in the next books?
Yeah, most likely.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something to think about. Like, if you really hate cliffhangers, maybe wait until the whole series is out before you start reading. But if you like that kind of anticipation, that you know what's going to happen next, then the cliffhanger actually makes the reading experience even better.
Okay, so the ending is a bit of a gamble.
I'd say so, yeah.
It all depends on your personal preference. But let's step back for a second and look at the bigger picture. What are the big pros and cons of reading this book?
Okay, so on the pro side, we've got Garber's amazing writing. She creates a truly immersive and magical world, like the North, with all of its cursed stories and crazy inhabitants.
You can't forget those miniature baking dragons.
Right, and then you've got Jax, the Prince of Hearts, who's just so complex and morally gray. And despite her naivety, Evangeline's journey is really engaging.
Okay, so beautiful writing, captivating world, intriguing love interest. What about the con side?
Yeah.
What are the things that might make someone put this book down?
Well, the pacing is definitely a big one. And Evangeline's decision-making, like, if you want a fast-paced plot and a heroine who always knows what she's doing, this book might frustrate you. And then, of course, the cliffhanger ending.
Right, so it's a trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing world building for a slower pace and maybe some frustrating character choices.
Pretty much.
But I think we've given our listeners enough information to decide if this book is for them or not.
Definitely.
But before we wrap up, I want to go back to Jax for a second. You keep calling him morally gray.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean? What makes him such a compelling character?
So when we say morally gray, it means a character who isn't just good or evil. They kind of operate in this gray area.
Mm-hmm.
They make choices that are both good and bad, and that makes them really unpredictable. And Jax is a perfect example of that. He can be kind and compassionate, but he's also manipulative and secretive, and he'll do whatever it takes to get what he wants.
So is he like a classic bad boy with a secret heart of gold?
Yeah, kind of. And that's always been a popular character type, right? That they challenge our expectations and they make us question our own morals.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Jax is that wild card, that element of danger that keeps you guessing. And that's part of what makes Once Upon a Broken Heart so fascinating. It's a story that embraces both the light and the dark. And it reminds us that even in fairy tales, things aren't always black and white.
Exactly. And that's what I love about it. It's a reflection of real life, Life is messy and complicated and full of surprises.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Once Upon a Broken Heart. We've covered a lot of ground, explored the good and the bad, and hopefully helped our listeners decide if this book is right for them.
And even if it's not, there are tons of other amazing books out there waiting to be discovered.
That's right. So keep reading, keep exploring, and until next time, happy reading, everyone.